My name is Tope Godis, and I'll be talking to you about my financial analysis project for Finance 381, Dr. Crescent's class. For this project, we were asked to pick 4 companies, and the 4 companies I'll be talking about will be Texas Instrument, Kohl's Corporation, Lamar Advertising, and Amadis's. The whole class worked on 2, Lamar Advertising and Amadis's, why I chose Texas Instrument and Kohl's Corporation. The main purpose of this project is to assess each of these companies based on their liquidity ratios, leverage ratios, profitability ratios as a loan officer. I'm giving 3 scenarios. The first scenario, all 4 companies are asking my bank for a $100,000 loan. The bank has $200,000 to loan out for 6 months to 2 of the companies. For this scenario, I'll be looking at their short-term solvency ratio, which is the same as the liquidity ratio. I'll be measuring the current cash and quick ratios. These ratios measure the firm's ability to avoid financial hardship in the short run. The second scenario, the companies are asking for her $500,000 5-year loan. The bank has $1 million to loan to 2 of the companies. In this case, I'll be using the long-term solvency ratios. These ratios measure the firm's cash flow, how adequate it is to meet the short-term and long-term obligations. And lastly, my bank wants to make a decision on which of these companies would be profitable to invest in. In this scenario, I'll be using the profitability ratio, which measures how the company generates profits with the asset it has acquired over a period of time. I would also look at asset management, total asset turnover, which measures how fast the company can turn its assets into a revenue. For scenario 1, the 6-month $100,000 loan, I measured the current ratio for Amadis's, which was 1. For Lamar Advertising was 1.17. Texas Instrument had 2.77, and Kohl's Corporation had 1.95. For the cash ratio, Amadis's had 0.16, Lamar had 0.09, Texas Instrument had 0.39, and Kohl's had 0.49. For the quick ratio, Amadis's had 0.87, Lamar had 0.81, Texas Instrument had 2.11, and Kohl's Corporation had 0.62. For this scenario, considering this group of ratios, which is the liquidity ratio, which shows how a firm can pay its debt in a short period, usually 12 months, I'll give this loan to Texas Instrument and Kohl's Corporation because they can pay back my bank on time. This chart is basically showing all 4 companies, and we see that the gray represents Texas Instrument, the orange represent Lamar Advertising, the yellow represent Kohl's, and the blue represent Amadis's. We see that Texas Instrument is right on top, while Kohl's comes next, and Lamar comes next, and then Amadis's is right at the bottom. For the second scenario, the 5-year $500,000 loan, I measured the times interest owned for all 4 companies, the total debt ratio, and the equity multiplier. And based on the figures that I came out with, Amadis's has a negative 0.85, Lamar had 3.89, Texas Instrument had 47.84, Kohl's had 4.97. For the total debt ratio, Amadis's had 14.6, Lamar had 56.59, Texas Instrument had 3.87, Kohl's had 5.82. For the equity multiplier, Amadis's had 1.68, Lamar had 3.35, Texas Instrument had 1.63, while Coles had 2.39. For this scenario, I'll be giving this loan based on how this company's ability to pay their long-term obligations. So I would give it to Texas Instrument because it has a low total debt and equity multiplier of 3.8, 1.6 respectively, which shows they have less debt, which means less risk. They have 47.8 times interest rate, which means they can pay their interest expenses. I would also choose Coles Corporation as my second company. This chart is basically showing all four companies, the long-term solvency ratios, and we still see that Texas Instrument is still on the top, followed by Coles, then Lamar, and Amadeus. For this last scenario, I looked at the company which my bank would be interested in investing in. I looked at the return on equity, return on asset, profit margin, total asset turnover, price earning ratios. For the return on asset, Amadeus came up with a negative 0.75, Lamar Advertising 26.19, Texas Instrument 30.02, Coles Corporation 14.49. Return on asset, Amadeus came up with negative 0.45, Lamar had 7.83, Texas had 17.77, Coles had 6.04. Profit margin, Amadeus came with a negative 0.24, Lamar came up with 19.40, Texas with 58.15, Coles with 36.4. The total asset turnover, Amadeus came with a negative with 1.89, Lamar with 0.40, Texas with 8.01, and Coles with 1.33. The price earning ratio came up to 30.49 for Amadeus, 22.54 for Lamar, 26.42 for Texas, and 13.27 for Coles Corporation. In this category, I would invest in Texas Instrument because they have a high ROE, a high profit margin, and an okay price earning ratio. This is a chart of all four companies, and like I said earlier, I would advise my bank to invest in Texas Instrument because I see that they have a high ROE, their profit margin is high, their price earning ratio is high. So I believe that my bank would earn back its profit in a short time. These are the formulas for the various ratios that I looked at.